For the safety of everyone here, we've all been asked to wear our masks, but I hope you can see the smile in my eyes, and I hope you can hear it in my voice. My name is John Humphrey. On behalf of Sunday Forum, I'm happy to welcome you to our presentation this morning. EJ will invite questions at key transition points during his presentation. So especially for those of you in the room, if you have a question, you might want to wait for one of those invitational moments. For those of you at home, please use the Q&A button to type in a question, and then I'll relay that to EJ, our presenter. Or if you want to use your raise hand button, that will allow you to ask your question out loud instead of having to type it in. You also have a chat button. We won't be using that as part of our program this morning, but you might want to try to use it to contact another attendee, or if you just want to send a friendly piece of feedback, that would be welcome also. Our presenter today, EJ Kelly, is presenting from home, so he does not need to wear a mask. He's been active in Plymouth in many ways, most notably recently by supporting the Groveland Food Shelf administratively, by serving on the board, and operationally by serving on the street. And he's also started the Radical Hospitality Group. EJ is a true inspiration. It's my great pleasure to welcome him to Sunday Forum.
Thank you, John. And I've been around Plymouth for a while and appreciate your leadership and in fact, mentorship over time. So I'm glad to be here this morning. And for those of you who pay attention to details, you may note that my subtitle has changed from what it was in the promotional blurb. I had originally been set to do this presentation in April, and at that point in time, I had subtitled it Compassion, Radical Hospitality, and Wholeness. That was a little much for me this morning as I got into working on it, and I'm spending a lot of time on transformation in this presentation, so we'll talk about that this morning. But last Friday, 9 days ago, Paula's Along the Way column that she sends out on Fridays talked about Jonah, and the word transformation leapt out of her passage that day, and I felt like I was on the right track. So again, I'm EJ Kelly, and just a word about how we got here today. During the programming year in 2018, our ministerial staff devoted a month, each month, to a topic around values of the church. And in September of 2018, if you remember back, the topic for that month was radical hospitality, one of Plymouth's values. And Seth and Paula and Beth and Dan gave terrific sermons, used great metaphors. Some of our favorite passages from Jesus' ministry in the Bible can be used to help illustrate radical hospitality. And a lot of us found ourselves nodding along and telling Beth and Seth and Paula and Dan afterwards, great sermon, great sermon. And it really resonated with us. And somewhere in that time, a number of us got together and said, that's wonderful, but what if we really led our lives that way? And what does radical hospitality really mean in today's world? And how might it be central to our lives, both individually and as a community? And so that's where this all started. And there's been a number of us just talking about it. And that's where I'm going to go today, is tell you really what it means for us. And I'm going to approach this as I do in my life as, for me, radical hospitality is a central spiritual value. It's a way of being and living in the world. And so that's how I'm going to approach this morning. And it's a way of seeing the world differently. And it's not going to be a set of action items or programs. I will talk about a few illustrative examples of something that that demonstrates radical hospitality, but it's not to say this is exactly what we want to be doing individually. And if you're not doing it, there's something wrong. Rather, it's just to help make what I'm saying clearer this morning. So I'm going to start with a story, a passage from someone who writes on radical hospitality. And I'm going to use that story this morning to really organize my talk. And there's a number of themes that are going to pop out of that story. I'll come back to it a number of times, and we'll go from there. So first the story, and this is from Kathleen Atkinson. And I'm going to put it up on the screen because there's a lot here. I'll pause just at the end of reading it to you, but trust me, I'll come back to it because you'll maybe hanging on a particular word. We'll come back to it. So here's the story. At our food pantry, we have a children's corner. It is filled with books and toys for the children to play and even choose something to bring home. One evening, little James waved me over to meet his new purple stegosaurus. He explained, "See the missing eye? He's been through a lot. I've been through a lot too, so I chose him. We'll stay together." And Sister Kathleen continues, "In this child's tenderness, I learned a new truth about the radical edge of hospitality. There is value in creating space for the other within our walls, as we often do. Hospitality centers carefully designed to welcome people for a momentary dip into our abundance of silence and beauty and prayer. But James was talking about hospitality even more radical, our sacred solidarity with all people." And she continues, "The solidarity to which James pointed is based on the vulnerability rather than strength, and the commitment to stay at the journey together. A solidarity based on mutuality rather than one gifted group welcoming needy others. In fact, we need the stranger in our lives, our conversations, and our community to reveal God's unbounded creativity. James shows us all a solidarity based on a mission always flowing outward, transforming our lives, and compelling us to transform the world. Radical hospitality, then, is not so much about welcoming others into a sacred space as it is living together within a sacred reality. We are one after all. We just cannot worship a homeless Jesus on Sunday and ignore another homeless person on Monday. We can't wall up our spaces of beauty and trash God's creation. We cannot create complicated structures to bring people together while denying that togetherness is, in fact, our starting point. So again, there's a lot here. What I'm going to do next is highlight some of the words that help me get my head around radical hospitality, and I'll then bring them together so we can look at them on a one piece of paper and think them through a little more deeply. And really the first thing I want to do is call attention to a contrast that is raised here. And when I talk about this contrast, it's to try to help us understand how radical hospitality is different than some ways we've often acted. I call it the common perspective. It does not mean that those ways are wrong. Giving money to a good cause is not wrong. And we still need to do that, and groups need that. I'm just trying to show there are layers and differences, and we need to do both. So let's go back to the passage, and I'm really working on the second half. But the first contrast is there's a traditional way of thinking about church work, charity, altruism, and it's often coming from power or strength, and it's one gifted group, as she shows here, helping out, welcoming needy others. And she contrasts that with a sacred solidarity with all people, and it's based on vulnerability. And I take the term and use the term vulnerability here, humility. It's appreciating that I have some of my own issues, and it's kind of there, but for the grace of God, that could easily be me. And maybe I'm not so special, and a lot of what I have comes out of privilege. So she talks about a vulnerability rather than strength, and commitment to stay the journey together. And she continues, it's not just about space or a sacred space where we engage in sacred rituals. Radical hospitality is about living together within a sacred reality all over our world, not just in our churches and our mosques and our synagogues and other holy places. So again, I'll share this contrast and we can talk about it, and then I'm going to use some video from other commentators to help go deeper into this. But the common perspective, and I'm using the word perspective this morning because it's really a way of seeing our place in the world and our place with others. The common perspective where we're giving is often power-based or hierarchical. There's a giver and a receiver. You're going to hear someone say this shortly, and I had it in my blurb. There's often a doer and a done unto. Maybe associated with noblesse oblige. The radical hospitality perspective is this flows from humility and love. And again, we'll talk about inner transformation where we can really do actions that follow our feeling of love and humility inside. A lot of times, the traditional way of looking at this is there might be a single isolated action. Again, not bad, but we give a coat away, we give money away. With radical hospitality, it's often relational. It's an ongoing relationship, or there's a larger context, or we're recognizing that we're part of a community, and there's a family or togetherness aspect to this. Radical hospitality, and this flows from the first or the common perspective, it's often one directional. There's the giver and there's the receiver. Radical hospitality, there's often a mutuality, and I'll pause here with just a small example from Plymouth, and some of you may be familiar with our drop-in program that Larry Johnson runs. And Larry brings food sometimes that he purchases or he gets from the food shelf, but oftentimes the participants in drop-in bring the food and share it. And it's a big deal for them to be able to give and share and be part of this. And on some days, Larry is sitting with the audience doing an art project that someone else is leading. And even, in fact, there are days where participants end up leading the art project. So there's times when I've gone to drop-in center and I don't know who the participants are that the program's supposed to be run for some days and who the helpers are, because everything is mixed together and it's one ongoing relational community that's based on love and humility. It's not, I'm not better than them, we're in this together. Often the common perspective is focused on fixing, and there's nothing wrong with fixing situations sometimes, but I think we all come from a background, a lot of us come from the background where fixing is really the whole goal. And in radical hospitality, it's much more judgment-free about the other person, seeing that person's inner dignity, and actually they have a potential for wholeness themselves. And part of what we're trying to do and be in relationship with them is help them see their own inner wholeness and dignity and work themselves with that. And we're together on the journey, just as we are with each other here at Plymouth. And then a traditional perspective of sacredness is often built based on space or ritual. And with radical hospitality, the sacredness is in people, relationships, and creation. So I'm going to go deeper with this way of looking at the world, and I'm going to get some help with it. some of you may be familiar with the Episcopal priest, Cynthia Bourgeot. If you read Richard Rohr's commentary, and I know a lot of you do, Cynthia Bourgeot is often a commentator there, and she's on the staff at the Center for Action and Contemplation, and she did have a post this week, I believe on Tuesday, maybe she had a couple of them on Mary Magdalene. So she's going to be familiar, and I'm going to share her comments, and I think you'll find them helpful. And after that, one more story, and then we may pause to talk about this a little bit. But this is going to be Cynthia Bourgeot.
Problems that we get into when we try, particularly in the West, to understand compassion, and this was right there in that film that we saw from that variety of responses, is a lot of people have a hard time distinguishing it from pity or from charity. And what happens, or from being a helper. And there's a subtle sort of, as we understand compassion, it implies a subtle power differential. You know, so that very often we place ourselves through an identification on the side of the haves. We are the ones that are practicing compassion or doing compassion, and we are the doers, and then there are the done untos. And it's like that, the great prayer, thank God I am not like other men. But there for the grace of God go I. We'll drop out the but for the grace of God. There go I, and we're closer. So how do you eliminate the power differential? Because true compassion is not like that at all. True compassion is like love, like eros, in that it levels the playing field and creates out of what were hierarchical human relationships a single wholeness. You spoke to that so beautifully, Ingrid, when you talked about the refugees making your wedding gown. That the final result of compassion and a compassionate action is that there is the healing and the empowerment of the whole. So we have to ask this, and of course Jesus was right onto this. One of the most popular of his teachings, the powerful one, was in the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the haves walked right by the person in distress, and it was the one who was the have-not, the Samaritan, the pariah, who was actually able to break the trap. And I think that what Jesus was talking about there was watch out. Watch out. Don't place yourself in the position of the entitled one, of the helping one, of the powerful or the strong one. Turn the table upside down and see what you get.
I love that, but let me bring it back closer to home with the story that involves Plymouth to keep illustrating this. And then we'll pause for a bit and talk about inner dignity. John mentioned that I spend a lot of time at the food shelf, and the person that runs the day-to-day operations there is Jay, and some of you are familiar with Jay. And a while back, this is all pre-COVID, Old School, a second-hand clothing store opened across the street from Plymouth. It was related to Steeple People, which used to be over on Lindale and Franklin. And it's an outreach program that was started by Hennepin Methodist. And I went over to talk to, Jay developed a relationship there where Joe, who ran the group there, would recognize that there are people in our neighborhood, Plymouth's neighborhood, who really couldn't afford to buy clothes. So he ended up sharing some of the clothes that Old School took in and wasn't pricing with the food shelf, and we would give those away. And if they didn't move in a week, we would then share the clothes. Jay developed this whole thing on his own. No one asked him to do it. And then if we had leftover clothes after a week that people had taken, we would in turn give those to the Basilica, and then one of our volunteers, Muhammad, who lives over on the West Bank, would take them over to that community. So that's a nice part of the story, but here's the bigger piece about relationship and community and who is the giver and who is the taker, and things switch. Old School would tend to get bikes occasionally, and that wasn't in their business model to sell bikes. So Jay understood that Old School was getting bikes, and he knew that Plymouth Third Sunday Group has a bike clinic every third Sunday where they fix up bikes. So Jay told Old School he'd take the bikes. He brought them to Plymouth to the Third Sunday Group, the bike fixing group. They fixed the bikes up, and those bikes were given away. And one of those bikes, there was a member of the Plymouth staff who needed a bike, and one of those bikes ended up back in the hands of a Plymouth staff person. So this is a way of showing, let me go back to my screen here. This action wasn't power-based or hierarchical. No one at the food shelf, no one in the Plymouth office told anyone to do this. It's flowing from love. It's not a power-based action. It's relational because a relationship has been developed between the food shelf, Plymouth, Old School. I went over and I talked to Joe at Old School and said, "What you're all associated with Hennepin Methodist." He said, "Really, we're on our own, and I care most about what happens in this neighborhood, in this corner, in this city, and I want a relationship with Plymouth." And so you see this in this example and many others you can probably bring to mind. Who's the giver and who's the taker? It just changes. It's mutual. It's a community supporting itself. And there's no insider, there's no outsider. The sacredness here is happening in community, not just within the building, not just within Plymouth. It's judgment-free. And to me is a terrific example of radical hospitality in our midst. It's looking at the inner dignity of our neighbors and the people we're working with. So I am going to shift focus here. Are there any comments or questions? So let me move on. In the welcome, or in the blurb that that advertised, promoted today's forum, there was some language in there from Kathleen Norris. Many of you may know who she is. And when I first read it, and perhaps many of you, I focused on the dignity of each and every person. And the idea that we're to see that dignity in each and every person. And it's certainly reminiscent of a number of the stories in the Bible, and in fact, that we're to treat every person we meet as Jesus. But then I noticed that there's earlier words in her phrase that are important not to skip over. And that's this language I've highlighted in blue, that true hospitality is marked by an open response to the dignity of each and every person. And so hospitality and radical hospitality has to do with not just the person to whom we're being hospitable, but it's about us as well. And if it's marked by an open response by me, by those of us in relationship, that means we must be open to change and transformation. And you see Sister Kathleen, from that language I shared with you earlier, a lot of her words imply the same thing. If we're vulnerable and humble, we're likely to put our guard down, our masks down, our shields down, and we're open to transformation. If we're at a journey together, we need to be open to change. If there's mutuality in a relationship, we need to be open to change. And she's very specific about we need the stranger, the other person in our lives, to reveal God's unbounded creativity. And then she's quite clear at the end that transformation, that radical hospitality is about transforming our lives as well. Yep, let me, so remember, Cynthia Bourgeot just mentioned the Good Samaritan. And of course, it's one of the many passages in Jesus' ministry that gives us a great example of how we should behave. If we just behave more like the Good Samaritan, we just gave more, we just shared more, we just listened to others more. There's this really, Jesus lays out this whole map. So why don't we just do that more? And here's the thing, radical hospitality is not just a change in behavior. It's really about a transformation in how we see others in the world around us. Codes of conduct, to me, don't work great if we don't first work on the inner change inside us, the inner transformation. And if we do that, it's much easier to be like the Good Samaritan than we just say, well, today I'm going to be like the Good Samaritan. And to me, that's a part of what radical hospitality is about, is in our encounters with our other fellow travelers in this world and creation, we're as open to transformation at a personal level, at an interior level, and that's what is going to lead to the exterior transformation. And here's a teacher that I particularly like. It's Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. She's a Zen Buddhist teacher and was either the first or second African American to be ordained as a Zen Buddhist priest. And Reverend Angel says, without inner change, there can be no outer change. So let me go back to, I'm sorry here, and share my screen again. I'm going to go back to Cynthia Bourgeot, who's going to pick up on this theme I just shared with you.
We all know the love your neighbor as yourself, but we always hear that as love your neighbor as much as yourself. And then, but I have to love myself first. And we don't realize that there's no comparison in there. Love your neighbor as yourself, one individual. So it really is fundamentally an act of seeing. The doing will fall out of the seeing. We don't see from the oneness. We don't know how to see from the oneness. We don't even know that we're not seeing from the oneness. And there's the dilemma, the rub.
So if we're going to transform our way of seeing, we are to see from the oneness, the passage I talked about and shared with you this morning that I told you we'd come back to quite a bit, and we are, Sister Kathleen talks about we are one after all. And we have a sacred solidarity with all people. And we're called not just to transform our lives, but that's to lead us to transform the world. So again, if aren't there social, political, racial, economic, and environmental implications of transformation in our way of seeing and being in the world? But let me pause for a second. Are there any questions? And I see one from Tom Anderson. I will take this right now because it illustrates what I was talking about earlier, and then we'll come back and talk about social transformation. Tom Anderson asks to compare and contrast the radical hospitality of the food shelf versus the good works from an organization like Beacon. And what I'll do is talk a lot about the food shelf. I do know I used to help run before Hannah did it, and then Jerry and Fran Davis did it, Families Moving Forward from Beacon. But let me talk a little bit more about the food shelf. I gave you the example before of the bikes, but really one of the ways that the food shelf practices radical hospitality is it follows a customer choice model of distributing food. So in other words, it says if you and I get to go to Kowalski's, Whole Foods, Lund's Byerly's, or the Co-op and choose our food, whether we want an avocado or a tomato or asparagus or strawberries or pasta or a wrap or hummus, we should treat our neighbors the same way. So while most food shelves in the city right now are bagging food, which is safe, and handing bags to people that come, what we have done is spread the food shelf across the entire outside of Groveland and create an outdoor market where people get to come and choose whatever they want. We have donations from 4 different Trader Joe's, Lund's Byerly's, Kowalski's. And so at times we've had pineapple we're giving away, dragon fruit, boxes of asparagus, that sort of thing. And so we're giving the people in our neighborhood the same opportunity as those of us who are privileged and have some money and live closer to a grocery store have. It's not exactly the same, but they have that sort of choice instead of just we choose for them whether they get tortillas or bread or spinach tortillas or hummus or dragon fruit or oranges. That's one example. Another is, and John just brought this up with John Humphrey when we were talking earlier, the community that works at the food shelf is a community, and it's mostly drawn from the neighborhood. And it's an opportunity for people who live in the neighborhood to be givers and share with others. And they come there and people remember their names and birthdays. John just happened to be at a birthday party, or there was a birthday pizza on Friday for someone that works at the food shelf. And I mentioned to John, this person who works at the food shelf, whose birthday was being celebrated on Thursday, she used to live at Lydia, and she was a member of the drop-in center. So again, it's that community, and now she has a chance to help others at the same time, where she has a place where she doesn't have a family in town. This is her family. There's one other person who, while he was homeless, said to me as we were unloading a truck from Second Harvest, without this church, I'd be dead. And he didn't mean that he wouldn't have food. He meant that it gave him a place to go and spend part of his life and actually feel like he wasn't completely lost. And you know, at the bottom of society being looked down by anyone.
EJ,
Yes.
before you go on to the next question on the screen, we also have a question from Karen Barstead.
Sure.
Go ahead, Karen.
Unmute now. I should be heard, correct?
I hear you.
Okay, good. I just want to share a quick story that Nina Johnson shared with us in her Friday email. She was with some of the children from Peace Camp, and they were walking about the neighborhood, and there was a man at the bus stop who talked with them and said that he had, you know, been watching what they were doing over the week and was really impressed with it. And he scrounged around in his pocket and came up with $1, and he gave them the $1. So then the children had the thought of, okay, what do we do with this $1? And they had seen another man in the neighborhood who had a sign, and he was asking for money, donations, whatever people could give. So the children went over and they gave that to him. So it was kind of a way of being in community, to receiving from someone with dignity, but then also giving to someone with dignity. And I think our children are learning things that are just so amazing and great lessons for all of us.
Thanks for sharing that, Karen. They also made food this week, sandwiches to be given away at Groveland, and came downstairs and delivered it. So even in that small step, people are relating together at that point in time and getting to know each other. It's just not some group somewhere across town that is being shared with. There's a sense that we are sharing with our neighbors, and I'm part of that. So thanks. Peter, I like your question. Give me a second on that, if you would. All right. Peter's asking, well, let me raise this and then come back to it. Peter says we live in a narcissistic society where the oneness you were talking about is overcome by our individualism. And what is your advice to overcome this? And again, I think it's this inner transformation that we need to work on. And I really think, again, Paula brought it up last week in talking about transformation, is what religion and spirituality in our world should be about today. Isn't just having a consistent set of beliefs or signing on to a consistent set of beliefs. It's really about transformation, inner transformation. And as I said, that inner transformation is followed by outer transformation. So let me, and that's not a perfect answer, Peter. I'm going to come back to it because I'm going to share one more quote from Angel Kyoto Williams. So I shared with you, without inner change, there can be no outer change. But the full quote of hers, I had lifted her second line: love and justice are not two. Without inner change, there can be no outer change. And without collective change, no change matters. So I know this sounds easy, but I think that inner change and working on who we are and who we're meant to be helps us get to that outer change, as opposed to just maintaining the individualism you ask about, Peter, in your question, and saying, I will take 2 more worthy actions this week to balance that out. I think over time, spirituality needs to be focused on transformation. And where I'm moving with this right now is we first work on our own transformation, and that starts inside and moves outside. But there's absolutely social, political, racial, economic, and environmental implications of transformation. So if we're to change our way of seeing our world and seeing other people in the world, that ends up helping us be part of collective change. So let me move on with that. this all sounds good, but I'm going to bring it much closer to home. The next statement is from an Episcopal minister, and she wrote this when she was led a congregation in Toronto, so a large city, and so she understands congregation, the leadership of a congregation. She currently is a professor at Claremont School of Theology in Southern California, and she's dean of faculty. Her name is Sheryl Kujawa-Holbrook, and she's talking about the level of response, radical hospitality at a congregational level. And so let me share this with you, and it's on the screen because it's a fairly big piece. So Dean Kujawa-Holbrook says, many congregations offer personal support and outreach, but such efforts often reinforce homogeneity rather than promote diversity and advocate for social change. Congregations committed to breaking from the status quo are called to develop a sense of radical hospitality. Radical hospitality has not only social, but political and economic implications. Rather than limiting their public theology to outreach or charity that maintains the unjust distribution of power and resources, congregations formed in radical hospitality exercise a commitment to justice. So again, the theme here is transformation, change, both at it. Oh, pardon me. Last sentence that I wanted to bring up separately. This is her next sentence. This model seeks to transform both the believer and society as a whole. So again, her ultimate sentence here is about transformation. So both our own transformation, which leads to changes in how we behave towards others, as opposed to we're just putting on a mask, a code of conduct. And the people that walked by in the Samaritan story, the Good Samaritan story, they were holy people for their time. I believe they were Pharisees, but they were religious people, and they had a code of conduct, but it wasn't the sort of internal feeling about love of your neighbor that the Samaritan had there. And so they just walked by that person because of concerns about purity. So again, we're talking about inner transformation, and that changing us as we engage in radical hospitality. And as we are changed, our community can be changed more deeply as well. And of course, Dean Kujawa-Holbrook is at Claremont right this moment. When she wrote this passage, if she wrote this today, I'm confident that it should also say racial and environmental justice, and that she would absolutely endorse this. This was written about 10 years ago. So I have to pause and just say, and I know she most likely puts racial change and racial justice under the rubric of social justice, but I can't emphasize that more. And one more piece of this as we live in the world, and this ultimately will get to Peter's question about individualism, is there's a connection between our care for the earth and care for one another. They're intertwined. We are one after all, is what Sister Kathleen says. We just cannot worship a homeless Jesus on Sunday and ignore another homeless person on Monday. And then she goes on to say, we can't wall up our spaces of beauty and trash God's creation. She views radical hospitality as an internal stance, a spiritual way of being within creation and not just with one other human being or our community of human beings. It really is all related. And to bring this home, just after George Floyd's murder, a lot of organizations in the city, not all of them related, that worked on racial justice, sent out notes to all of us. And a number of you are familiar with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. I know Plymouth as a congregation is a member. And so a few days after George Floyd's murder, I got this note from Interfaith Power and Light. I write to you with profound anger and sadness following the horrific murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police. At MNIPL, we are committed to building a world in which care for the earth and care for one another are intertwined. We work towards climate justice because we believe all beings deserve a thriving, life-giving environment, and because we strive to preserve our planet for generations to come. The violence of white supremacy strikes at the core of our hopes and dreams, and it withers our work towards a healthy and sustainable planet. And you can read the rest. So again, ultimately, the stance of radical hospitality is not just about how we live with one another, but it's just as much about how we live in the world. Again, I'm going to touch on transformation again, and transformation that brings us into seeing the world more. The slide title here tells you who one of these people is. This is Thomas Merton, of course, on the left. A wonderful mystic and contemplative. And the person on Thomas Merton's left is a young Dalai Lama. So I have one more slide to share about Cynthia Bougeot, and this is about Thomas Merton, and I could share Thomas Merton's passage directly, but she does a wonderful job. So let me get to that.
So, last image to leave you with. We're here in Louisville. It's my first time I've ever been in Louisville, but I've known Louisville for years from Thomas Merton, from that wonderful thing that's formed the actual theme song of our conscience. My hotel, as for many of you, is right in the corner of what used to be 4th and Walnut, in the middle of the shopping district, where he realizes, I loved all those people. I could not be separate from them. I was theirs, they were mine. And he says, I woke from this funny and spurious dream of belonging to this false, special realm. And I could say, thank God, I am like other men. And it's from that seeing that everything shifted in Merton's life. It's like the watershed epiphany in his life. And all of a sudden, he moved from pity, charity, compassion is something you did, to the natural flowing of this different kind of seeing. And his final words in that beautiful, beautiful statement is, I have no formula for that seeing, but the gates of heaven are everywhere.
I'm sorry, there we go. So Thomas Merton, let me pause for a second because I have a way to bring this together. What do you see here? What's this a picture of? A lot of us in Minnesota who spend a lot of time outdoors and are very concerned with the future of this planet and are environment have maybe learned to see this not just as a birch tree or a spruce, but we see it as a forest. Itself is a living organism. Everything in this forest supports each other. They can't live without each other. There are elements of the forest we don't see here, fungus and mushroom and everything underground, that is integral to the forest. And if you're standing in the middle of this picture, are you part of the forest? Are you intertwined with it? I think a lot of us, in the readings we do, spending time outside in Minnesota, some of the consciousness raising we've had about our environment over the years, just hikers, people that spend time in the woods, understand that this is just more than a bunch of trees or the individual trees, and the whole is just a sum of the individual trees and the ferns. It is a forest and it's all interconnected. And that's a different way of seeing that I didn't have when I was younger. And maybe many of you didn't have. And when we're in the forest, or even when we're not there, we know we're part of this. And it's part of our future and destiny. And that's a change of seeing that Cynthia Bugeaud and Thomas Merton were talking about this morning. So how might it be if we took that same appreciation that we can change our view of how we appreciate and see things, and that when we walk through the forest, we're not the ones that have dominion over it. It's not ours to run, but we have a mutuality with everything there. If we can learn to see that, how might we learn to walk around the neighborhood of Plymouth and the city of Minneapolis differently? And might it be possible to have an experience that, like Thomas Merton had, that changed everything in terms of how we relate to, how we see our neighbors, our fellow humans? And there's a oneness that Cynthia Bugeaud talked about. We're to love our neighbors as ourselves. It's as if when we're in the forest, we love that as ourselves and our neighbors and our people we spend time with, is we're appreciating that type of close connection, that as they thrive, we thrive. And there's this mutuality and community together. So one more image. And I was walking around Lake Harriet, so it's my time in the woods a few weeks back, and Jackie Prince is there today. And I thought I saw Jackie in the distance, and I thought, oh, that's just me thinking I'm seeing, it's probably someone that looks like Jackie. And then I saw some other faces that seemed familiar, and I was reading them as the faces of Plymouth people, and I'm thinking, well, I must be thinking that because I think this person's Jackie, and so and so my mind's doing that to me. But sure enough, it was all people from Plymouth. And later that day, Barbara Reed sent me this note, which had been in a Richard Rohr daily meditation, and I wanted to share that this morning because, again, it's more and more of us need to see the world the way radical hospitality asks us to serve it. So I'm going to read this this is from another food shelf in Massachusetts, and this person was writing Richard Rohr about how important Richard Rohr's daily readings are. But this person that runs this food shelf says, I no longer think of our work as service, but as an act of solidarity, of becoming one with our neighbors. Service implies a vertical relationship, one above another. Solidarity calls for a horizontal, two-way relationship between equals, one-to-one. Of course, God is at the center of it all. So I appreciate Barbara and the Plymouth Walkers sharing that with me, and it seemed to fit. And I know we would love to just have a program and an agenda, and I know Peter would love me to talk about this morning, but just like I'll make a comparison with racial justice, it's not just passing a law and a program. It's really seeing the world differently and our place in it. So I'm backing up this morning saying the starting point is how we see our place in the world with each other, just as some of the people I've shared with you this morning have talked about. So that's kind of the end of my prepared remarks. Questions or comments?
EJ, I think we're near the end of our time.
Yes.
So I'd like to have everybody say thank you to EJ. I don't know how we do that. And hopefully the 34 people watching from home are clapping for you as well. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation, wonderful talk, lots to think about. Just real briefly, next Sunday, or next month, Sunday Forum will be on August 23rd, and our topic will be, interestingly enough, food as justice and community. Our presenters will be Kay Taylor and Miriam Omari from Plymouth's Kitchen, and we hope to have you join us on Sunday, August 23rd. Thank you all again. Thanks for coming. Thank you all for coming. And that's our program for today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Some of the comments coming in on chat. Applause. Thank you. Clapping wildly. I'm so glad I tuned in. It was enriching.
What were some of the other questions? I see there are 4 questions.
So he addressed most of them during the presentation. The one that didn't get talked about is the one at the end. I think one thing that holds us back from really moving into radical hospitality on a personal level is the transformation or change is scary and hard. In other words, if radical hospitality means I have to change, then I may resist it. Thoughts about getting over hurdles that keep people from willingness to be open to transformation? So